I am Ayana Pointer, the Housing Choice Voucher Landlord Liaison, and I will be your moderator today. The City of Norfolk Department of Neighborhood Services and Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority have teamed up to help promote the Rent Ready Norfolk program and the Housing Choice Voucher program. These programs are essential to tackle our main objective, to create more affordable housing stock in Norfolk. We would like to take a moment to inform you about these programs. First, I'll inform you about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which helps low-income families, elderly, and disabled individuals to afford decent, sanitary, and housing in the private market. There is no cost to landlords to participate in this program. NRHA will advertise your property for free using our referral listing. NRHA provides prompt, convenient, and free housing inspections to landlords who participate in this program. And our housing assistance payments are directed deposit into landlords' accounts. Also, you have access to a HCV staff member who will assist you if any landlord and tenant issues happen to arise. There are plenty of benefits to participating in this program. A few of them are low turnover rates, reliable income, and high quality tenants. We vet our tenants to make sure that they can afford their portion of rent. And like I said, we also do inspections. They are biannual inspections, but you can request an inspection at any time if you feel like it's necessary. For more information about our HCV program, you can go onto our website at nrha.us. Secondly, I would like to invite Ms. Kimberly Pierce from the City of Norfolk. She is the Director of Neighborhood Services to inform you of the Rent Ready Norfolk program. Sorry about that. We must be having some technical difficulties today. Okay, so I guess we'll give Ms. Kimberly some time. We'll come back to the Rent Ready Norfolk program at the end of our session today. So I'll go ahead and jump on into our Landlord Learning Series. Our Landlord Learning Series is designed to empower landlords with information to make informed decisions when it comes to renting out their properties. We are hosting these monthly series on a range of topics. Today's topic is about the hot trending of fair housing, focusing on the amendments and updates. We will hear from Ms. Mahalia Dryden-Mason, who is a fair housing trainer with the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulations. I would like to go over some quick housekeeping items. We ask that you hold your questions until the end of our presentation today. If you have questions in the meantime throughout the presentation, you can add them in the question box and they will be addressed at the end. Also, a copy of the presentation is in the handout display on your screen. At the end of our session today, we will send you a survey to get some feedback from you about our sessions so we know how we can improve them, and also other educational topics you would like to know about. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Mahalia Dryden-Mason, and I would also like to thank you, Ms. Mahalia, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
And it is my pleasure to share this information with you this morning. Today we are sharing the Fair Housing message about the history and hot topics of the Fair Housing Act and the Virginia Fair Housing Law. So my name is Mahalia Dryden-Mason. That's a lot for you to remember. So I made it very easy. I go by my nickname, Molly. So, you know, it's not about me, it's about the information that I bring to you. I am still there at DPOR. This is my 19th year, going on my 20th, and I'm very excited about that. Yes, sometimes I get burnt out because this is a tough topic to talk about on a regular basis. But the beauty of this is that at the end of each seminar, as long as one person has gotten it, I feel that I have done my job. So you know about DPOR, we are the agency that regulates everything that is not legal, financial, or medical. So your engineers, your architects, your contractors, all of those we regulate. We regulate the real estate industry. And for that reason, we are an unusual regulatory agency that has a human rights organization within that agency. So we have the Fair Housing Office, and that Fair Housing Office is part of what the real estate agency does. So a little disclaimer for you. I'm not an attorney, but even if I was, when we do this type of work, we have to tell you about the law. We're a government entity, so we have to tell you what the law says. We don't give you advice. What we do recommend, especially for landlords that, you know, are into the business, you want to have somebody that knows fair housing that is going to help you to do the right thing. So we do advise you on one thing: get a good attorney that specializes in housing, and they will have to know about fair housing. And if when in doubt, call our office. We're going to give you an honest assessment. Now, we can't tell you what to do, but we're going to tell you what the law expects of you. So today we're going to talk about the history, a little bit about the history. I'm not going to go into a lot of it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. I'm going to talk about the current hot topics that we have going on in fair housing that everyone should know about. The goal of the Virginia Fair Housing Office is to, at some point, have it where every single Virginian knows about fair housing. This is a law that is protecting everyone. Sometimes I hear housing providers say, well, what's the right of the housing provider? You have your rights within the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act, which oftentimes usually favors the landlord. This is about even that landlord that could possibly get discriminated against when he's going to get financing for a housing that he wants to build, or that he may be looking for insurance, and maybe wherever he wants to put that property is one of those places that have been redlined, and that insurance company is not going to treat him as fairly as they may treat other properties in other communities. So to know fair housing should be a thing that everyone should know and everyone should respect, because under the human rights law, housing is a universal right. How do we want to do this? We want to get out there. We want to tell the public, but I find sometimes that the public is harder to reach. So I'm going to reach the children in school because they are going to be the future. And if we can teach them about their rights and responsibilities from early, irregardless of all these taboos that people are trying to put up, maybe the housing business would have an opportunity to change and be rightfully fair for everyone. So I want to talk about implicit bias. Usually I have an interaction with the community, but we have a short limit of time, so I'm just going to talk about implicit bias. Implicit bias is something that every single one of us have. I can remember being that child with my mother. I was my mother's only child. So wherever my mother went, I went. And most times that was around adults. Back in my days, I'm a child of the 50s, you know, you could not speak unless you were spoken to. You had to be seen and not heard. So oftentimes that listening lets you learn a lot. And in listening to your parents talk, in listening to them talk to their friends, they may say things that they may not say freely out in public. Like they don't like a certain group of people, or they don't want to talk to that neighbor because that neighbor is of, a different religion or something of the sort. So these things are then embedded into you. And what usually happens is when we are in times of controversy, times of confrontation, times of debate, a lot of times these ugly things show up. And what it is that that bias is favoring one thing, group of people, idea, or narrative over another. And you find a lot of that on Facebook. You find a lot of people's implicit biases coming out, some of them that we didn't know about. You find that you may have had this friend for the longest of time and you never knew that they thought that Muslim people were a certain way or that Black people do a certain thing. So here are some of the examples of implicit biases. And you can see where it started even in school. Now, if you look at this picture here, you can see how it was geared to be, accepted or read by others. The children of color are usually the sad and angry children, while the Eurocentric children are happy and proud. So a child seeing that in school, what are they supposed to believe? What about this one here? One of you I like, but I'm not allowed to say which one. Now, why would they even say that? And it's obvious whom he may like. Examples of others. This young lady that is Hispanic, and she's so right, because every time you look at the media, and the media is talking about illegal immigrants, whose face do they put up? So you can have a person here that is very American, born and raised here, but because they have, they are descendants of Hispanics, then people assume that they are illegal, not thinking about other people that are illegal here that aren't Hispanic or aren't people of color. They could be from England, they could be from Ireland, they could be from Australia, but we never think of those folks as being illegals here. You don't talk like you're Black. How is a person supposed to talk? We have very well educated, especially females of color. So if you're educated, you're going to speak like you are. And some may just grow up in that area where they have the accent just like anyone else. This is the one I love. The woman with the hijab is asked, you were born in Canada? Of course, she could be born anywhere in the world. The hijab has nothing to do with where she was born. The hijab has to do with her religion, which in this country should not make a difference, but it does. And then you have the gentleman that is told, you have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me. Let me tell you that from the point of a landlord talking to someone who may be asking them for a reasonable accommodation because they have a mental disability, this does not go off well. What this is doing is pretty much, in that person's eyes, could be a challenge to them asking for reasonable accommodation. I heard a housing provider the other day say that when people are asking about having animals, a lot of them lie. If you're going into the business thinking that people are going to lie, then you're going to have a problem. Because if you think somebody is lying to get a reasonable accommodation and you don't give them that reasonable accommodation, then you might be the one that ends up in the bad position, because that person is going to realize that they have rights and they have every right to file a complaint against you. And you're going to have to go through the complaint process. So why was this law needed? A lot of what is happening today, a lot of what happened in yesterday and yesteryears was designed to happen. That is something that most people don't understand, especially if they're on the side where they have benefited. So we have a land where we were told a lot of stories, and in most of those stories, people that were Eurocentric usually were the heroes. You never heard about the heroes from the other side. So when folks got here and they met those beautiful natives that they thought did not have any kind of culture, did not have any kind of religion, that was a lie. These folks did have culture. The woman was regarded as the highest in the tribe because she was the carrier of life. Without her, there would not be people around. They defined everything they could not understand by a god. So when the sun rose, it had a god. When the moon rose, it had a god. When the wind blew, it had a god. So they had their own culture, their own religion. But that wasn't good enough for the folks who were coming here, escaping religious persecution by the king who wanted them to follow his religion. And when they came here and those natives saw them coming over that mountaintop with the sun behind them, it gave them the illusion that the sun had sent these people to them. So they greeted them with open arms and taught them the way of the land, how to survive. But that survival came with a price for those natives. Many were killed. Women were raped. They were put there to labor. We see all those cowboy movies with people sitting there smoking the peace pipe. Do you really think they were sitting there smoking that peace pipe? And do you really think things went that way? But we're going to get into some laws. One of the things that the newcomers did was to give these folks blankets from those folks who had died of smallpox, knowing that the native population did not have the immune system and the consistency to fight that disease. So many of them died. And as they died, those who settled here gave the illusion that they couldn't do the work. So apparently they went across the ocean to get another set of people to bring here to do the work for them. And they promised the families of those people who sold them, to the Europeans, mainly the Portuguese, that were the ones that were trafficking these humans from the old land to the new land. And they told their families, yeah, they're going to go to this new land and they're going to have a great life. But they didn't have any plans like that for them. They built those ships to carry human cargo. Those ships had the area in the bow of the ships with shackles so that they could shackle these humans side by side. Can you imagine sleeping, eating, doing everything right there? Some would die and you would have to wait for them to come and move them. You're sitting in each other's human bodily fluids. Yes. But that wasn't half the horror. Some people had the audacity of calling it a cruise. I don't know of anyone that cruises that way in this day and time. And then when they got to land, it was a whole different ball game then. If you thought the wonderful voyage was bad, they had no idea what awaited them here. First of all, those settlers called them savages, untamable, uncivilized, part human, only 3/5, in a way that they would be beneath anyone else. If they were women, they were expected to have at least 10 children. And those 10 children probably started when they were still baby girls. If there were men, they were expected to work because they got the biggest and the strongest and the healthiest. And then they called them a threat because they were the biggest and the strongest and the healthiest. So people got a little, I guess, conscience. There was a war. It's a civil war. You would think that the South won because every time there's reenactments, there's all this big hoopla about the Civil War. I guess that's where we learn to share that, it's okay to lose because you'll still get a trophy. But they lost, and it forced Abraham Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. He did so to start out the year 1863 new and fresh. It was signed on January 1st, 1863. But some of those wonderful owners of humans decided that they're going to keep their humans for at least 2.5 more years, because I guess somebody had to do the work. So they were forced to go ahead and plant and sow and store enough food until June 19th, 1865, when they were told they were free. That day is now considered and has been considered in many states Black Independence Day, because that's the day that they were officially freed. But that freedom only was words on a paper, because if you saw the movie 12 Years a Slave, then you know that there were many that were freed. Some of those folks out there that meant harm did not care whether they had papers or not, would fake that they couldn't read, and would recapture these folks. So this man was recaptured for 12 years until another white man saw him and knew that he couldn't be a slave, and fought and got him freed. By that time, his family had lived for 12 years without him, had no idea where he was, what he was doing, or anything. So as time went on, we started getting all kinds of different laws, and those laws, a lot of them are about home ownership, a lot of them about land ownership. See, many believe that in getting rich, that you can use, stocks and bonds, but they say that ignoring land would be the biggest mistake, because land means that you get those trees taken down, you have a whole new neighborhood, you're starting houses, or cost for houses is $300,000. In 10 years, that $300 would be worth a whole lot more because of the equity that is built. And if you own that whole subdivision, oh my goodness, yes. So land is probably the best way. And we realized that back in 2008, when we had the big real estate bust. It could have cost this country a whole lot. So let's look at some of these laws. We have the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act says, hey, look, too many people are coming through on the west side, on the east side in Ellis Island. By this time, we have already stolen land from Mexico, so let's go ahead and start moving there, because if you don't lay claim to this land, somebody else could come and get it. So these settlers knew that what they did, somebody could come back and do it to them, so they were encouraging people. And who were they encouraging? The only people that had any kind of power in this country back then were the white men, not the women, not the children. They only got it by osmosis when they were affiliated with that white man. So they made them a promise of buying this land, pennies to the dollar. All you had to do was live there for 5 years. So you can imagine those families that bought that land has grown within their families for years. And off that land, they get money to buy more land, to buy more housing. And that's how the whites in this country establish their wealth. So for all those years, from 1862 till 1968, we had no kind of laws, no kind of laws from 1619, no kind of laws from then till now. And so you can see how people started gaining that wealth. The Indian Removal Act. Now, you know, they own all this land here. So what did the newcomers do? They came in and they say, okay, according to this, they said the president was negotiating, but they weren't negotiating. They probably came to those folks and said, look, we need you to move because we need this good land that you have. And we're going to put you up there in North and South Dakota, you know, those places where, yeah, y'all can live and I'm sure y'all can handle it. You have the most brutal winters out there. Reservations are dump land that have been, that people were pushed into living in. According to the historians, this wasn't a negotiation, it was genocide. Let's talk about the Jim Crow laws. These were the laws that try to tell people that no matter where you live in, you may be separate, but you're equal. Lies. Because people of color knew they couldn't sit anywhere on public transportation. People of color knew they couldn't get an education until they fought hard to get to schools. People of color knew they couldn't get married. Marriage was not allowed. They jumped the broom. And when they got married to the opposite race, they were either thrown in jail or mandated to get out of town, like they did here in Virginia with the Loving family. But thankfully, their experience turned into a good experience because when they got up to public housing, the only place that would rent to them, they were blessed with knowing that there was going to be a march on Washington and that powerful Black men were going to be speaking. Inspired by those Black men like Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, Ralph Abernathy, and the one and only Reverend Martin Luther King, this young lady wrote a letter to President Kennedy asking him for help because of President Kennedy and telling the ACLU to take on that case. Today, you can marry whomever you choose to marry. A young man during the pandemic talked about sundown cities. He said he had no idea about sundown cities, thought that his parents must have really shielded him. He's from Northern Virginia and decided to go to Devil's Bathtub here in Virginia, but crossed over to Tennessee one evening only to be told that it seemed like he wasn't from there. And when he said, why do you say that? The young lady said, because this is a sundown city. He said, well, what is a sundown city? And she said, it's a city where when the sun goes down, people of color are not allowed. Now, folks, this is the 21st century. I knew about sundown cities in the 19th and 20th century. We didn't have them in Panama, but we had the Southern Command bases. And yeah, you had to have a reason for going on those bases, but those bases were also covered by guards at the door. So if people were going in there, they had to pass the guard. So these things, you know, we knew about going on because we also saw that discrimination in Panama, where the Americans live, where the Americans decided that they owned that land, which they were actually renting, but they figured they owned it. And in fact, they said that President Kennedy at one point wanted to make the Canal Zone the 51st state, but with his assassination, that couldn't be done. But you know, these things were shocking to me to find out that they're still going on in the 21st century. And just like I spoke to one of my gurus the other day, we always have the lunch and learn for the Fair Housing Office. And we were talking about some of the comments that you get from people that this happened a long time ago, and why are we bringing it up? And it's because it hasn't stopped happening. Homeowners Loan Corporation. During the 30s, when there was the Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of these presidents that actually did a lot of stuff for the people. He thought about the people and how he could help them. So during this time, he made sure that they were able to refinance home mortgages so that they could keep their homes from going into foreclosure. Now, this happened in 1933, and it turned around and it happened again in 2008. And everyone had so much to criticize about it. Franklin Delano Roosevelt also made it where you could buy affordable housing and get financing to keep you from losing your home. The Chinese Exclusion Act. Did you know that they didn't want Chinese to come here during the 1800s? Oh no, they didn't want them here until that Pony Express became a pain because it was too slow. But the Chinese had something that we wanted. And again, we went across the ocean to get people to come here to do the work. So these Chinese were then encouraged to come here and build that railroad because they had the technology. And with them came the help of a group of people from Europe, the people that they call the Black Europeans, to show you how they felt about the word Black. Those Black Europeans are known as Irish people. And if we haven't learned from their story, then we will never learn, because diversity, without diversity, there is chaos. When the UK mandated the Irish to only plant that Irish potato, they did not realize that when disease comes in, if you have one of something, it's going to erase that one of something. And that's what happened. When you have diversity, then you can counteract what is taking place with that diversity. So if we haven't learned that, we have a problem. We also haven't learned that when we are discriminated against, and you turn around and discriminate for the same reason, it means that for some reason, you haven't learned your own lesson. Because the Puritans turned around and discriminated against the Irish because of their religion, which is the Catholic religion, from whence their religion came, which is amazing, folks. So the Irish dealt with seeing signs that said no IA allowed. The Irish dealt with being the little Catholic kids that were oftentimes picked on. Social Security Act, FDR again. He said, you know what, when we get old, we shouldn't be broke. Boy, oh boy. Cost of living has not kept up with Social Security. So many of those who are on Social Security are living paycheck to paycheck, barely. And with the inflation today, even worse. Japanese internment camp. These are the folks, the only folks that can say that the United States has given them a real apology and compensation for the forced relocation of them to detention centers. Amongst those was a 4-month-old baby by the name of George Takei, who is well known as Mr. Zulu. And he wondered, what did a 4-month-old baby do that you had to put him in an internment camp with his parents? 4 years only, compared to the centuries of Africans dealing with forced labor, lots of beatings, lots of killings, lots of child abuse. But then they had the excuse that they were part animals. We're still waiting on the 40 acres and a mule also, another promise that this country has not kept. There's the National Highway Act. The National Highway Act was a great idea. It says that it allowed the president to take land, we call that eminent domain today, to build highways for the defense of the country. Just in case we got attacked, we needed to have escape routes. Great idea. The part that did not work out was that they used a lot of the land that was owned by well-to-do Africans and African Americans and took that land without compensating them as they compensated those whose land they took away from that were white. So over the years, many have been fighting because they have not received the compensation they or their family members should have received. And about 4, 5, 6 months ago, Governor Newsom returned a lucrative $175 million assessed worth of land to a Black family from whom that land was stolen back in 1924. This has some people a little nervous because now they're realizing that in taking land from certain people, they may have to give that land back if those folks have the documentation and everything that they need to show their ownership of that land. We have many places within our own communities. You can check around in Norfolk and find out what places. You can check and see where the highway came through, whose land was taken, and then you will understand that what I'm telling you is not made up. Martin Luther King was the man of the hour, the man of the time for many in the African American community. Martin Luther King wasn't that much loved by anyone else because he was able to speak and not afraid to speak. As he would say, I would rather die for something than live for nothing. And that's exactly what he did. So he brought up the topic about housing, and that did not make very many too happy because they did not want to live next to Black families. And they made it clear. I don't have to exaggerate it. You can look and you can find videos. You can find videos about Gage Park. And the ones that were talking the most were the women that didn't even have any power. And they would say things like, I don't mind their children going to school, but I just don't want them going to school with my white children. And they can stay in their Black community, not live in my white community. And they were very candid about it. So Martin Luther King knew that in having your own home, you could create wealth. He said, with that wealth, instead of taking out those hardship loans to send your children off to school, you could be sending them to school with the equity that you have on your home. Or you could start a business so that you could make the money to send your children to school, or take a vacation as a family, or put money aside for retirement. So Martin Luther King knew the politics played here, that even though people knew what was happening, they were still going to look for ways to, try to argue that this wasn't necessary. So Martin Luther King did something that was amazing. This was way before they even had the law. He knew that in order to get protection from discrimination, he had to show that discrimination in housing was occurring. The whites knew it was. So Martin Luther King played their game. And what he did was he started a process that has become very much a process that we use today. So this cartoon is written in the language of the 60s. And it says here, we sent Negroes into large numbers to the real estate offices in Gage Park. Every time Negroes went in, the real estate agent said, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have anything listed. And then soon after that, we sent some of our fine white staff members into those same real estate offices. And the minute those white persons got in, they opened the book. Oh yes, we have several things. Now, what exactly do you want? Folks, what they were doing was testing. Testing is something that we use today. In Virginia, one person, as long as one person knows that a video recorder or an audio recorder is being used, that's all they need. But these testers would go in, they are highly qualified to get approved for housing, and they would go in and ask about housing. Depending on what the situation is, let's say it's a situation where, a mother felt like she has 5 children and that's the reason why the landlord didn't rent to her, then they would send families with children, couples without children, single parents, different scenarios, and see how they are treated. And from that, they can deduct or see whether or not there is discrimination taking place. So after he did this, two senators got inspired because he also marched in the Gage Park area and was confronted by mobs with sticks and rocks that oftentimes would harm them. But it didn't stop Martin Luther King. And so Edward Brooke and Walter Mondale got together. They're opposite sides of the aisle. Edward Brooke was a Republican, African American, and Walter Mondale was a Democrat. Back in the days, the Democratic Party was the discriminatory party, and the Republicans were the party of the people. So many of your, especially soldiers of color, joined the Republican Party. So these two senators introduced the bill. The bill was, hidden by a Senator Judge Smith from Virginia, lived in Fauquier County, that did not want to see integration done until April 4th, 1968, when he had no other choice because the African American communities were being destroyed by the anger of the African Americans that were mad that the one man that encouraged nonviolence was taking out violence, and they reacted by showing their anger. It got the attention of the lawmakers, especially the president, who said, you need to send the message out. So they debated, they argued, they did what they needed to do. That was done in 7 days, and on April 11th, 1968, the bill was signed into law. It is known as the Federal Fair Housing Act, Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act. It was homage to Martin Luther King, the person whose life was sacrificed so that people will have fairness in housing. The president said then that it proclaims that fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life. Unfortunately, it's not. We still have people that believe that they can dictate who can live next door to them, and they are going to make their lives miserable. But I will remind you today that fair housing is not just about getting the housing. It's about being able to use, enjoy your home, the public and common use areas, and all of the amenities on that property, just like anyone else. So when we look at the timelines and amendments, we look at this law that is only 54 years old. I want you to know that we lived for 349 years. At least those who are African and of African descent have lived for 349 years without a law to protect them in one of the most powerful rights that any human has, and that is to housing. As we look at the timeline, we see that there were 4 protected classes when the law first started out. It was race and color to protect those of African descent and those who were African. It was national origin to protect the Africans, the Irish, the Chinese, the Mexicans, and sadly, they have the natives on this list, wherein the natives are the most native of anybody. They are the original people here. So I'm wondering sometimes if those who are settlers think that they are more original than anybody else. When it comes to religion, we were told in the laws to keep religion and law separate, but we've done it over and over. Our forefathers, many were agnostic. They wanted this land to be a land of religious freedom where you could come, and whether you wanted to have a religion or not, you could, but it wasn't going to harm you in any of your other rights. Then in 1974, women determined to be counted as an equal to men, fought hard, protested. Men got mad, but the women were determined. They sang, I am woman, watch, hear me roar. And they were marching. And finally, through the 14th Amendment, they received protection. So if you're looking to get rid of the 14th Amendment, you know you get rid of women's rights. Now, some would love that to happen, but I don't. I definitely do not. We have worked too hard to get where we are today. That protection is only 48 years old. And then, amazingly, familial status that has been around from day one and disability are only 34 years in protection. Landlords could evict families with children without a care. Not anymore. Landlords could put rules for children without a care. Not anymore. Those rules can be challenged. Disability. We've had disability from day one. People with disabilities are fighting for their rights, and rightfully so. They are the most discriminated in the nation. Here in Virginia, the most discriminated is based on race, then disability. So the Virginia law is now 50 years old. Yes, we were enacted 4 years after the federal law. It was enacted by the General Assembly. Virginia was the first Southern state to have a fair housing law. Virginia is also the first state to have a FAP, which is a Fair Housing Assistance Program where they assist HUD to do the work of HUD under fair housing. That means that we train, we investigate, we enforce, just like HUD does. In 2020, we added 4 new protected classes. We added source of funds, sexual orientation, gender identity, and we went from veteran status to military status. So now we have 12 protected classes. So whatever activity you're doing within housing, there are 12 protected classes that you cannot discriminate against: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, elderliness, familial status, disability, source of funds, sexual orientation, gender identity, and military status. Some of the areas within Virginia also have their own fair housing law, because the federal government says not only does the federal government get to have their own law, but states can have theirs and localities within the states. So we have 2 localities, Fairfax County and Roanoke, that have their own fair housing laws. So Fairfax County has a FAP like we are, which is the Fairfax County Fair Housing Office. They do government work. And then Roanoke has a fair housing board. So they both have marital status as protected, because Southern states have a law that says you shall not cohabitate unless you are married. Now, it's not something that is enforced, but every so often there's a landlord who would try to enforce it. Roanoke also has age as a protected class, because between the ages of 19 and 54, there's no protection. So if a young person in Roanoke is told that they cannot rent because they are not 25 and older, they can actually file a complaint with the Fair Housing Board there, and the courts in Roanoke will handle that case. There is one more area that is looking to get their fair housing law, and that is Charlottesville. We also have exemptions under the law. The exemption says that if you own 3 single-family homes or less, you can rent or sell to whomever you choose to without regulation. It also puts out Mrs. Murphy's rule, which says that if you are an owner of a property of 4 units or less, and you live in the property itself, you would be able to rent to whomever you choose to, because Mrs. Murphy brought up the stranger danger issue. An owner of a single family home can rent or sell to whomever they would like to, as long as they are not using the services of a real estate agent or broker. If you hire a real estate agent or broker to manage your company, then they have to disclose that they have to do the job according to the law. Now, these 3, even though it may seem that they are able to discriminate, advertising will take them out of any exemption they have. So if they publish or speak something that is discriminatory, it is considered an ad. Therefore, their exemption will be taken away. Religious organizations are considered private clubs or private organizations, and therefore, if they have non-public housing, they are able to base the approval of those living in that housing on the religion, but they cannot discriminate based on any of the other protected classes. So if they're Baptist, they can make it where only Baptists live there, but they have to accept anyone that is a Baptist, whether it's their military status, whether it's their source of funds, whether it's their sexual orientation or their familial status, they have to accept them. Educational institutions, even though one young lady just debated back and forth with me until I told her I don't have to debate. I'm telling you that it is, but you know, we'll see. And several years later, this case came out where the young lady wanted to take her dog that alerts her when she's going to have a panic attack, gets on her lap, puts a paw on each shoulder, stares her down so that she would calm down. And the school told her that they will not allow her to bring her animal there because her animal, because she just wants to be spoiled. Well, let me just say that the young lady told them that it's a possibility they could go to court on this. They said they didn't care, but this resulted in $140,000 settlement. So let's talk about the new things that are going on in fair housing. We had a press release from NAFA. NAFA is the National Fair Housing Alliance. It's one of the most well-known nonprofits up in DC that is funded by the federal government. And one of the things that they were happy about is the appraisers are now getting the spotlight focus on them and some of the discriminatory actions that they have taken. Miss Carlette Duffy owns several properties, and she wanted one of her properties appraised, thinking that she may go ahead and sell it. When she called to get the appraisal done, she had two of them done. One of them came out for $125,000, and the other one was $110,000. Now, she knew something wasn't right there. So what she did was clear her house of any photos, anything ethnic. She went ahead, she made arrangement for another appraiser to come in, and this time she asked her best friend and her husband to be at her house so that, you know, they would be the ones that they would think own the home. Well, they did so, and the appraiser sent back the appraisal, and this is what the new appraisal came out to be, $259,000. There is another case, and what I've done, I have put this case in as a, you know, with the link so that you can watch it. But this is another case where it's a Black couple, and they have like a $1 million+ home, and they got a really low, I think the appraisal that they got was $994 million, and the real appraisal came up to over $2 million. So, you know, this was something that really got to me when I started learning about fair housing and training to be the trainer here, because I just can't imagine why. But, you know, we had that discussion yesterday, and some people say, well, they want to see the house as they would see it looking like theirs. But it also gives a lot of work to that person trying to sell that house to try to get that house. You know, I have plenty of figurines and all that in mind. So I don't know how it would be done. Individuals with criminal records. Since April of 2016, we have had the ban the box. Research has shown where when you have a one-size-fits-all policy that says if you have a criminal record, we will not rent to you, it has a disproportionate effect on African American and Hispanic men. It also has a disproportionate effect on people with housing instability, homelessness, and mental disability. When we call the police and they throw them in jail, because we don't call the police exactly, we're calling 911, but the police shows up. And if they have no idea about how to handle somebody with mental disability, it could be chaotic. So what they've established here in Virginia is a model policy tenancy tenant screening. And this screening says that you first want to qualify the applicant based on their income and credit. Then you want to tell them that you're going to do some background check to see if they're a good candidate for rental. If you find any red flags, then you want to have a conversation with them to find out really and truly what they did. Some people may have had an amassment of tickets and they got stopped and put in jail because they had so many tickets and did not pay them. So there are many situations that are non-violent, and even with the violent cases, they want you to go back certain times. So check out the model policy for tenant screening when you get this presentation also. Harassment is one of the ways that you can definitely take away the right for use and enjoyment of the home. So in Harrisonburg, Virginia, we had a manager that was accused of sexual harassment and racial discrimination. He used unwelcome sexual advances and demanded sexual favors from female residents. For those that did not agree to provide him these sexual favors, he would take adverse actions against them. This person also used racial slurs towards residents and their guests. He even attempted to ban residents from entertaining African American guests. Whether the residents were African American or white, it didn't matter. They were not going to have them. So this resulted in a settlement of $335,000. Let everyone know, sexual harassment, whether it's at work or in an apartment, it is not legal under any law. And under fair housing, if you harass anyone based on any of the protected classes, you are not allowing them to have equal use and enjoyment of their home. So housing providers who know or should know that they're being harassed need to take action, or else those providers will be considered part of the harassment. Two things you don't want to do in fair housing. You don't want to retaliate against anyone. Everyone has the right to exercise their right in fair housing without being threatened, coerced, intimidated, or interfered with. If you do that, then that person can file a complaint based on retaliation. And even if you work for a property and you tell somebody about fair housing and you are fired because you told them about fair housing, that too is retaliation. We also don't allow restrictive covenants. We don't find them used as they were before. In many of the leases, there were words like, this house cannot be sold to anyone that is not of the white race, or this house cannot be sold to any Blacks, Chinese, Mexicans, Jews, Hebrews. They will go into detail. Today, what we look at is many of the housing providers and the homeowners association, condominium association, they put in their bylaws, and they have to realize that their bylaws don't supersede local, state, or federal laws. You have to be in accordance with the fair housing law. So if your bylaws are a contradiction to fair housing, then your residents have every right to file a complaint against you. In 2020, we had added protected classes. For those who don't know the term, it is a term that is used in anti-discrimination law, both federal and state, and referring to people that share common characteristic and need protection from discrimination and harassment. So race, color, sex, religion, national origin, familial status, disability. Those 7, wherever you go in the United States, you are protected under those. Now, whatever state you live in, you want to find out if that state has their own fair housing law and if they added any other protected classes. Here in Virginia in 1983, we added elderliness. In 2020, we added source of funds, sexual orientation, gender identity, and we had added veteran status. that was then amended and changed to military status. Here's a quick review of each of the protected classes. Race is about a thing that was created here in this country. According to this, it's a social construct that was designed to put people in boxes. Those boxes hold them down socially and economically and allowing privilege to go to one group above all others. We also have a given decision under the Second Circuit Court that says that if a landlord knows or should know that a tenant is being harassed because of their race and do nothing about it, they can be held under fair housing as a violation of the law. Color, it's about the color of your skin. Some people aren't even African American, but because their skin has some color to it, they may be considered so and discriminated against. Most times you will have a matching of national origin and color when it comes to this protected class. When it comes to national origin, it refers to someone born outside of the United States or the descendant of such. So my children, I was born outside of the United States, but my children are born here in the United States. They are Americans. I am an American too, but a naturalized American. So they are first generation Americans in this country. There's one property that was in Virginia Beach that wanted their residents to be able to read, write, and speak English. I asked them who was given the test. Well, that case went out as a no cause from our board, but HUD was hot because they knew, like I knew, that national origin and language go together. And so they got $75,000 out of that property, and that money was given to organizations to do awareness in Spanish. Oh, Fair Housing has a great sense of humor. And they also gave the family a small settlement. Religion, it means that housing has nothing to do with your religion. You can have a religion, you don't have to have a religion. It doesn't matter. One of the things that we look at is having a certain amount of discrimination that is totally geared towards one religion. And usually those would be the Jewish religion and the Muslim religion. And then you have organizations that want to tell those that they help, you know, if we're going to help you, you need to join our church. You cannot do that under the fair housing law. If you have a shelter and someone wants to partake of the services at the shelter, it cannot come with blackmail. You either join our religion or not. Sex is about knowing that both male and females are equal. It amazes me that, you know, you still have some landlords that expect there to be a male in the house after all these centuries where there have been so many single mothers. But sex doesn't only stop there. It also includes sexual harassment, where your maintenance crew or your staff should not be in anybody's house unless there is an adult in the home, that they should not be doing work for people unless there's a work order, that they should speak to everyone, not just some of your residents. Domestic violence, 88% of those who are female, they are the survivors and victims of domestic violence. So we want to make sure that landlords understand you cannot evict someone because of the domestic violence. You can evict them because they didn't pay their rent, they didn't do other things right, but it cannot be because of the domestic violence. And we have banks that have been denying women from closing on their homes because they were on maternity leave. Again, it said maternity leave, not paternity leave, not family leave. So it was directed at women. That too is violating the law, and the ACLU usually handles many of those cases. Elderliness means that you are 55 and older, and you can live in either the 55 and older community, where at least one person has to be 55 and older in 88% of the occupied units, while the other 20% can be as management, determines. It could be people with children, and it could be very well families with children, even though this type of community is allowed to discriminate against families with children. But there were cases where, both parents were in the military, they went off the war, and the grandparents were the caretakers. And in those communities, they were allowed to be there. Familial status. A lot of times the issues there are things like occupancy. I had a great conversation with my guru, Susan Scoville, and I asked her about that one discussion we always have. So many would tell me, oh, Miss Molly, it is the law that a boy and a girl cannot sleep in the same room, and it is not. There is no law anywhere. Natural families sleep themselves the way they choose to. No government comes into your house to tell you how to sleep your family in a democratic country. Okay? Occupancy is 2 persons per bedroom, but it all depends on the house. If the house has extra room besides its public and common use areas, those extra rooms can be used as bedrooms. If those houses have rooms that are quite large, 1 person needs 70 square feet, while 2 or more in a room need 50 square feet each. The larger the room, the more people can be in there. So the young lady who wants to rent the house in Idaho has 7 children. The landlord say she will overcrowd his 4-bedroom house. But last time I checked, 2 times 4 equals 8. She has 8 in her family. But when HUD went there, guess what? They found that this house had 2 living rooms and 2 extra rooms. So she will not overcrowd that house. We also look at rules. Rules are to be about the health and safety of all your residents. When you make rules about just children, then you are allowing the adults to do exactly what you told the children what not to do, because you mentioned nothing about all residents. You said children. So the property that said that the children had to be supervised while playing outside also said that the children couldn't skateboard, they couldn't rollerblade, and they couldn't do any extracurricular activities. So that property had to build a $10,000 accessible playground. And they couldn't get it any better. Sexual orientation and gender identity, 2 of the protected classes that they fought hard to get, because so many asked me in my 19 years, Miss Molly, when are they going to make sexual orientation a protected class? And I said, this is Virginia. And then lo and behold, 2020 came and gender identity and sexual orientation were added. So sexual orientation is about your attraction, and that attraction comes from the heart. If you're attracted to the opposite sex, you're heterosexual. To the both sexes, you're bisexual. And if you're attracted to the same sex, you're homosexual. But you're a human being, and human beings need housing. And it should not matter to that housing provider anything else but can they qualify and are they going to be a good candidate? That's what you need. Gender identity is the gender-related identity, appearance, and gender-related characteristics that may be in an individual with or without regards to the individual's designated sex at birth. This works with the brain. That's why children at very young age can say, I am not a boy, I am a girl. Or I am not a girl, I am a boy, because their brain is acting in either a male or feminine way. Military status has now broadened the law. Veteran status only dealt with those honorably discharged from the military. So now we have just about everybody, anyone in uniforms, whether they're active or reserve, the National Guard, the Coast Guard, the veterans, their retirees, and their dependents are all protected. And the big one that we waited for was source of funds, to allow families the opportunity to choose nice neighborhoods to bring up their children, because where you live is who you are. So we want to give families choices. I know that when I wanted my children in school, I wanted them in a school where there was diversity, because the world is not mono-race. It is multiracial, and my children needed to understand everybody. That's what I wanted. So I live in communities where there is diversity, where my kids are going to learn cultures from other children, where they're going to learn to travel the world without even leaving their neighborhood. That's what I look for. So right now, what we're looking at is making this available to all families here in Virginia. So we have it where before, landlords could say, I am not part of the, housing choice voucher program. I choose not to participate. Well, you can no longer do that. Now you have to accept any source of fund that is legal and legitimate. So alimony, child support, SSI, SSDI, housing choice vouchers, cash, anything that is traceably and legal. The only people that can claim exemption from source of funds is any person or that owns any person or entity that owns 4 or fewer rental dwellings in Virginia, or any individual or entity that owns 10% or less of the number of rental dwellings in Virginia. They also can deny if the unit is going to take more than 15 days to pass the inspection that the occupant needs in order to use the housing choice voucher. Some of the ways that you can discriminate based on this protected class is using advertisement that is saying you're not going to accept any kind of payment programs, you're not going to accept vouchers, you're not going to accept SSI, or this apartment was not approved for vouchers. So remember, advertising will always take you out of exemptions. Charging more for rent, deposits, or fees. Making the housing unavailable to rent, sell, or for any other reason. And denying the resident's use of source of funds when you want to use certain facilities, maybe like the rooftop or the patio. If you're steering residents to less desirable areas of the property, or insisting that somebody has to have a job in order to get housing from you. No one has to have a job. Even in market price housing, as long as you have a legitimate way to show where your money is coming from. You may have been a blessed child that got money from a rich uncle. You don't have to work, just sign a check. That's all you need to have to know. So you don't need to have a job. And there are some people on disability that don't work. Let me say another thing. When it comes to source of funds, many housing providers trying to get around the law wanted to tell those who are using housing choice vouchers that they had to show that they made 3 times the total of rent. That is absolutely not true. If a person is asking for help in getting housing, it means they don't have the income to pay that kind of money. But if the housing authority is going to pay $1,200 of that $1,400 rent, then all that resident is responsible for is $200 each month. 3 times $200 is $600. Now, if you want them to show they make 3 times their amount, that's fine. But you cannot ask them. And if you ask them that, it means that it's automatically you don't want them there, and they can file a complaint against you. So let's talk about disability and the most challenging of the protected classes. Disability does not discriminate. Many of our soldiers have gone out with disabilities. Sometimes we forget another demographic that has disabilities, and those are our children. A parent may come to live on your property, but They don't have the disability, their child does. Does that mean that you have to make reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications? More than likely. So let's talk. We first need to know what a disability is. So under the law, we piggybacked on the Americans with Disabilities Act. They are the experts when it comes to people with disabilities. So they already had a definition and we just piggybacked on it. So the definition consists of 3 definitions. The first one says whether it's mental or it's physical, they are both of the same weight. There is no difference between any of those 2. But they say if you have an impairment, that's one thing. When you have that impairment and that impairment limits one or more major life activities, then you have a disability. So an example, like I always give, is that of the sugar. Because, you know, in the South, we don't say diabetes, we say we have the sugar. So if you have the sugar, but you're eating right, exercising, and taking your medication, then you don't have a disability according to the ADA. Now, when that sugar causes your eyes to go blind or causes you to lose your ability to use your kidneys, you know, or if you have to have something amputated, whether it's a toe or a foot or whatever, that's when ADA looks at it as having a disability. If you have a record of having such an impairment, now the record, what I look at is the law where it says if a person demonstrates that they are a clear and present threat of substantial harm to people or property, you don't have to rent to them. But remember, it says clear and present. So you cannot use what a landlord tells you that that person did a month or so ago, because that's past. That's not present. The other thing is, the most amazing part of this definition says that even though a person may not have a disability, but is regarded, perceived, or seen as if they have a disability and discriminated against, that person can actually file a fair housing complaint based on disability, even though they don't have one. And that's because the housing provider has viewed them as a person with disability and discriminated. Powerful? Yes, it is. So I like the equalizer in fair housing, and I have made my own equalizers. So when I started working, I would ask those who were in my class, what did they tell you about fair housing? So when we do all these, you know, in person, I'll say, who are my fair housing virgins? And they would raise their hand, and I would say, well, what did your property management tell you about fair housing? And oh, they would tell me all kinds of different things. Some would say, oh yeah, they told me that fair housing, you should be able to treat everyone the same. Or they told me to wait till I saw Miss Molly, and Miss Molly would tell me about fair housing. Folks, if you have anybody working for you and that person is handling housing business, before they even start, you should be giving them some type of information about fair housing. Because that thing about treating everyone exactly the same is not true. You see, at the end of the day, every single resident has the right to use and enjoyment of their home, the property, and all of the amenities that are enjoyed by those who are able-bodied persons. In this case, according to what Sandra Day O'Connor said many years ago when she was talking about affirmative action, she said, sometimes you have to treat people in an equal way for them to have equality. This is one of those. When she made that argument, like I said, it was about affirmative action, of which she partook in, because had it not been for affirmative action, she may not have been Supreme Court Justice. She said she wasn't crazy about it, but it benefited her. So that's the same in fair housing. So in order to equalize housing opportunities for people with disabilities, the Fair Housing Law and the Fair Housing Act demand. It didn't ask you nicely. It didn't say maybe if you want to or not. It demands that housing providers make reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. Let's understand reasonable accommodation. We see a young lady here and she has her parking space. Do you notice that they did not put her name? They put a code. She knows that code and they know that code. And anybody that's parked in that parking space that doesn't have that code should be towed. Now, reasonable accommodation. What is it? A reasonable accommodation says if you have a resident that has a disability, then you have to be prepared to make changes to any rules, any policies, any practices, or any service so that that person can have the same enjoyment that able-bodied people have. A housing provider has to do everything he or she can. There are times when that request may be unreasonable, and we'll talk about that. But when it comes to reasonable accommodations, they can happen at any time of tenancy. It could happen as they are applying because they have dyslexia and aren't able to read or write, or have not finished school to be able to read all the way out, in some of these big words. During tenancy, let's say they had a nervous breakdown one day and they're screaming and hollering and disturbing the neighbors, but it's because they had an episode. In that case, the person that works with them, the social worker, the caseworker, or somebody who can advocate for them may say, you know what, they had a rough week and I totally did not check to see if they were taking their medication. I will make sure that they take their medication every day. We'll be all right. That's a reasonable accommodation. And a very important time to make sure that all bases are covered is when you are getting ready to evict someone. Make sure you know whether or not that person has a disability. Because if they have a disability, you are to ask if there's anything you can do to alleviate what is going on so that they do not have to lose housing. And the reason why I say that you have to do that is because if it is shown that they have a disability and that disability could have a reasonable accommodation that would alleviate the problems that are being caused, then that housing provider has to. According to Virginia, changes in rules, policies, services, and practices, same as the Fair Housing Act. Now, if you are a 504 recipient, because you are getting funding from the federal government, public housing and all those places, you have to make all changes, whether structural or paper, that is necessary for that person to have use and enjoyment. So private properties usually handle paper changes. One of the changes that will need some type of modification, but it is considered an accommodation, is the parking space. Here in Virginia, the Supreme Court Justice of Virginia decided that that would be a modification until HUD got wind of it, and HUD was not happy again. So they made the amendment, and if you read the joint statement between HUD and the DOJ on reasonable accommodation, the very first example of an accommodation that they talk about is a parking space. Federally funded properties take care of all changes. And why is that important to know? It's because that resident does not pay you for any reasonable accommodations. It is all the responsibility of the landlord or the property management company. So an applicant looking for reasonable accommodation has to meet the definition of disability under the ADA. Then they have to show that there is a relationship between the disability and the accommodation they're asking for. But if that is visible to you, you do not have to ask them for any type of verification. Like, for instance, you see that the person is in a wheelchair. They have a miniature horse with them. Then that miniature horse is pulling the wheelchair. Do you need for them to go to the doctor to tell you that the miniature horse was going to pull the wheelchair for the person that may not be able to roll the wheelchair as they would like to? No, you can see it. So there's no reason for you to ask them for verification. The request must be reasonable. We'll also talk about what's not reasonable. Landlords need to have a conversation, and in that conversation, listen more than you talk, because as you're listening, you may hear you may get a better understanding of what this person needs. And you may be able to tell them of other choices. Now, you must understand that at the end of the day, they are the ones that get to choose which choice they go with, because they are the ones with the disability. If the if the request is reasonable and would be able to alleviate the problem, then the landlord should grant the request or run the risk of violating the fair housing law. Let's talk about what's unreasonable. According to the law, for a request to be unreasonable, it has to pose an undue financial and administrative hardship. Translation, you have to be very, very broke and very, very busy. And according to my guru, Sarah Pratt, Council of Remen and Dame, twice director of FHEO, no is not an option. There should be some type of interactive process where you are talking to the person and you are able to give them some type of resource. So let's say they ask you for an accommodation that fundamentally alters the nature of the program. It means they're asking you to do something that a housing provider doesn't necessarily do. So if they were to ask you to go shop for them at the grocery store and come back and put their groceries away, that is something that a housing provider does not do. But today we have Instacart around, and we have many of the supermarkets that would also deliver to these to the resident. So you could also get them in touch or show them how to use the app and help them to get that type of service without telling them no. You say, you know, that's something we don't do, but here is Instacart and you can get a hold of them. So examples of reasonable accommodation, of course, I'm going to go with the assistance, emotional support, and companion animal because it's the most popular of them all. And we have housing providers that keep saying that people lie to get these animals. Let me just say that there's a lawyer that also says, I tell my folks to allow the accommodation because if they're lying, it will come out. So under the ADA is where you have your service animals. A lot of times we try to call them service animals for all of it. But service animals are those animals that can actually go into stores, they can go into the malls, to the hospitals, to schools, because they have a specific job that they do for the person with the disability. The two service animals allowed are dogs and miniature horses. The miniature horse and the dog first started out as guide animals for people who are blind but have evolved. The horse can now help those who have mobility issues. The horse can also help those who are in the little people community, and they modified the horse's size to 14 inches so that they have a sturdy animal that they can lean on because of their issues with their legs and their spine and neck. Dogs are now doing things like telling you if you're going to have a panic attack, if you're diabetes, needs taking care of. It could tell you about epilepsy. Oh my goodness, it has broadened its job. So dogs and horses, dogs usually retire early. Horses tend to live a longer life. Cats are really good too because they say when you rub on the cat, it releases pheromones. So for people with like epilepsy or panic attacks, it calms them down and helps them to relax. The guinea pig story comes from a young lady that wanted to have her guinea pig with her in school. She was going home several days a week just to get a fix because she had panic attacks. She asked the school, did all her research, contacted us. It wasn't until one of my gurus got in touch with the school to remind them that they are a part of the Virginia state government and that it wouldn't look good for a Virginia government entity to sue another Virginia government entity, and that this is something that was that young lady's right. She now has her guinea pig with her. If you haven't heard about the monkeys, you need to. People with spinal cord injuries, people with MS, those debilitating diseases that rob them the use of their hands and feet, those monkeys become the hands and feet for them. They can open doors, turn on lights, pick things up off the floor, get food out of the refrigerator, warm it up in the microwave, help feed the person. They go to school with them. They do a myriad of things. I think these monkeys may need to become one of the main service animals too, because they go to school with the person that they help. And
Miss Manley,
ma'am, yes.
sorry to cut you off, but we are at the end of our time and we still wanted to give everyone a chance to ask some questions.
Okay, so let me, I just tell this one and then we can ask questions because I'm pretty much at the end and then they can look at the rest of the slides.
Sounds
So
good.
that's good. Yeah, they can ask questions. So I just wanted to tell them that this dude here with the snake actually actually walked into a Burger King with a snake around his neck and said that the snake was a service animal. And they said, no, you got to go. That's not a service animal. He said that the snake would squeeze on his neck to tell him when he was going to have an epileptic seizure. No, he was the reason why they had to define more in detail each of these animals. So under fair housing, any animal could be an emotional support, companion, or assistance animal. And I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Again, just to remind anyone, if you have a question, you can type it in the question box, or if you want to ask a question directly, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask the question. But we do have one question in from Miss Sharon Cross. She says, I am Sharon Cross. She said, I am a property manager and I represent a home that will not pass the housing voucher inspection. For instance, missing screens and windows that do not stay up. The owner has put a lot of money in the house so far and is tapped out. Am I still required to take applications from persons with vouchers?
Well, you're gonna be required, but you might want to check with HUD to see what it is your next step should be. You know, and not necessarily HUD, but your housing, housing authority, because it's their rules, and we're not involved in that part of it, just the fair housing side. So it would behoove you to really call and check with your housing authority and to find out what would be required of you. And like you said, the person is tapped out. So I know HUD checks on stuff like that. When you say, I can't afford it. So they will definitely double check to make sure you really can afford it. Unfortunately. Yeah. Some of the questions is not going to be easy for me to answer, especially if you ask me like HUD policy and stuff like that, because I don't study HUD policy. I know a lot of it, but I don't want to give answers on questions that I'm not truly familiar with. So I would usually point you to the source. So either the public housing that you're dealing with or directly with HUD to ask them what your next step should be.
All right, thank you very much. And That was the only question we had at this time. If, again, remind you, if there are questions, please type them in the questions field or raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask your question.
There's a lot of other information on the rest of it, you know, that you all can have. I'm sure that they're going to share the presentation with you, and that way you can go through the rest of it on modifications and stuff like that.
Yes, thank you. And the presentation is available in the handouts that you all should already have access to.
Yep,
it looks like
it up there.
That was the final question that we had.
Yep.
So we are going to turn it back over.
Well, first, I want to thank you for joining us today, Ms. Malley, and for that excellent information. For our attendees, if you do have any questions that come up after you review the presentation, please contact Ms. Dryden-Mason directly. Her contact information is in her PowerPoint. While I have you here today, I do want to take a second to introduce Ms. Kimberly Pierce, who is the Director of Neighborhood Services with the City of Norfolk, and she's going to inform you about the Rent Ready Norfolk program.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to briefly go over our Rent Ready Norfolk program and share some information with you. So the goal of the Rent Ready program is to increase the number of viable rental units in Norfolk. We do that through education and through inspections. We have a certification program for landlords and property managers who participate in our Renting Smart Academy. And we also will come out and look at your property and certify it to be rent ready. If you are interested in information about that, please get in contact with us. Our number is very easy to remember. It's 664-RENT. And we'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about how the program works and what the certification process is like. As I mentioned, we do have a Renting Smart Academy where the majority of our courses are provided. We are about to wrap up for the, I guess, spring semester is what we would call it. And today's Landlord Learning Series actually fulfills our courses for the beginning part of this year. We will take a break over the summer and then we will resume classes again in September. We have a schedule already drafted and we are going to be confirming our facilitators for the second half of the year. And as soon as those dates and facilitators are confirmed, we will post it on our Rent Ready website. One thing I do also want to mention is that we are working on a tenant education series right now. We have spent a lot of time since Rent Ready was first established back in 2016, educating property managers and landlords, and we are looking to include and expand our program to educate tenants as well. One of the things that our landlord and tenant relations officer, Denise Wilson, will often say is that renters are reactionary, and so they usually don't reach out until there's a problem. And so what we want to do is try to get their attention earlier in the process so they really understand what their rights and responsibilities are as renters. And we're going to do that through a series of short educational videos that are going to be aimed specifically at tenants. And we are going to post them on all of the city's social media platforms and provide links to our community partners who can also put those links to the videos out for tenants to see. We are really interested in making sure that the rental arrangement and the rental agreement works well for both parties. And we feel like we need to invest a little bit more time in how tenants are educated about the rental process so that they are better prepared to be good tenants for you all. We are also working on a database so that we can capture all of our Rent Ready participants and track those that are going through our certification program, as well as tracking those that have certified Rent Ready properties. So I will be sending out an email this week to all of the current participants that we have, and we will be asking you for some additional information such as contact phone number, email address, mailing address if that's appropriate. And if you will complete that information and send it back to us, we will then have you captured in our system. And then as we send out information, we will have that database where we've been tracking your progress, and we can answer questions for you about where you may stand in the program or what courses you've completed and things of that nature. So please be on the lookout for that email. And then the final thing that I will say, and the information is on the screen, is that if you have any questions or want to learn more about the Rent Ready program, you can go to norfolk.gov/rentready and visit our website. You can email us at rentready@norfolk.gov, or again, you can call us at 757-664-RENT. If anybody has any questions or has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, please feel free to give us a call or send us an email, and we'd be happy to assist you. Thanks, Ayana.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce, for informing us about the Rent Ready Norfolk program. If you're interested in the Rent Ready Norfolk program, please contact the Department of Neighborhood Services directly. Once again, we would like to encourage all landlords with rental properties in the city of Norfolk to consider leasing through the Housing Choice Voucher program. As I said at the beginning, this program is designed to help low-income households, individuals with disabilities, and elderly individuals afford safe and sanitary housing in the private market. I would like to reiterate that there is no cost for landlords to join this program. We do advertise your properties for free, and we do offer free inspections of the property as well. Landlords who become a part of the program receive direct deposit of their HAP payments. And we also are here to assist you if you have any landlord and tenant issues that may arise. To learn more about the HCV program, please go to nrha.us. We would like to thank you all for joining us today. You will receive a survey from GoToWebinar. Please complete that survey and submit it back to us so that we can get any feedback from you all, and also learn about any other educational topics you are interested in. Our next session will be held on March 24th, focusing on top 10 mistakes landlords make. You can register for that class at nrha.us using our event calendar. We thank you all for joining us today and have a great day. See you next time.